Okay, good morning everybody. This is take 2, actually for me about take 5. I've had to do this several times on bicycle basics. And for some reason this video won't let me turn it around to do both sides. It'll only let me do one side, so hi! But anyway, we're going to talk a little bit about bikes. As you guys know, the last couple years I've been doing more cycling than I have been doing actual triathlons. And when I first started, I would tell my cycling friends I'm a triathlete, and they would say, "Oh, is triathlete French for doesn't know how to ride a bike?" I kind of took offense to that and thought, well, maybe I ought to learn more about my bike. So I am going to tell you some information so no one will say that to you. There is so many different styles of bikes out there. There's road bikes, there's time trial bikes, there's hybrids, there's mountain bikes, there's gravel bikes, there's snow bikes, electric bikes, tons of bikes. But the two kind of bikes that you're going to see mostly in your training and racing is a road bike, which looks like this. I think most of you have a road bike. Some of you have a hybrid or a mountain bike, but I think most of you have a road bike with the drop style handlebars right here. The other bike you'll see out there on a lot of the courses and even while you're training is this style of bike. You'll hear some people call it a triathlon bike. It's not a triathlon bike, it's a time trial bike. All kinds of cyclists ride this bike when they're racing. You won't see as many people training on this bike just because it's not quite as comfortable. It doesn't climb as well as a road bike. And besides the geometry and a bunch of other stuff that's different, that gives you extra speed, the biggest difference, I think, is kind of in this cockpit area. That's what this part of the bike is called. You can see that there's these bullhorn style handlebars. This is where the shifting happens, but this is where the braking happens. And that's why you won't see these bikes riding in a lot of traffic, because you have to move your hands around too much. You can ride upright on it, but that kind of defeats the purpose of being on a time trial bike. You want to be in that aero position. So triathletes do train on this bike, their bikes, but they kind of save it more towards the end of their training when they really have to get used to the position, because it does use different muscles. This bike, in case you're wondering, it has a bunch of little orange pieces of tape on here just because the last time I rode it was in a 24-hour race, and we had to have reflective tape. You're not going to see any other bike like that, probably. But the road bike, this is where we all love to be, for the most part. The thing that's different on my bike right now is I've got my clip-on aero bars on here. You will see this when you're racing, and you will see some people training with their aero bars. I put them on because last summer I had a really bad bursitis in my elbow. I couldn't put the weight on my arm this way. And every time I went over a bump, I thought I was going to die and start crying. So I put my clip-on bars here so I could rest more on my forearm than have this. Couldn't even get on and off my bike. It was pretty bad. But anyway, now I'm better, and I've just been a little bit too lazy to take the aero bars off, but I will. So here's your handlebars. There's 3 parts to the handlebar. There's the tops. This is where your hand position would be, and this is why this needs to go. This is where your head position is when you're climbing. This area is called the hoods. This is where you're going to spend probably 90% of your time with your hands here on the hoods. This curved part is called the drops. And this is where you will go when you get really confident, not right away, but when you get really confident in descending. Now, when you do get good at it and you end up down in your drops, that's a really good power spot, and it actually is the most stable part of the positioning on the bike. But you want to make sure that your hand is big enough that you can reach your brakes. You never want to be down in your drops and you don't have access to your brakes. Some of you have smaller hands, sometimes the space is a little bigger, so just make sure that you can reach your brakes. This whole area is the brakes and the shifting. Sometimes people call them shifters. This is where you control the gears and your stopping. I'm going to tell you just a couple parts of the bike. You don't have to remember any of this, but just so that when you go to the bike store or when somebody says something to you and they mention a part of the bike, you'll kind of know, you'll at least have heard it before. So this part right here, this is called the stem. This is the headset right here. This part is the head tube. Oops, right here. This is the front fork. And on the other side, you'll see the quick release right there. That's how you take the front tire off. We'll practice some of that stuff. This part going across is the top tube. I have a little piece of tape right here to mark my seat post because my bike's so small. When I take it into the bike shop, a lot of times they loosen it and they move my seat around, and I mark where my seat goes. So anytime anybody fools with it, I know exactly where to put it. This right here is called the down tube. This is called the seat tube. Right here is the crank set, and that includes the cranks, which is what holds your pedal on. A lot of people ask what kind of pedals they should get. That really ends up to be personal preference. I ride Speed Play because I can clip in on both sides. I don't have to flip my pedal around to find the clip-in part, but a lot of pedals don't do that. That's fine. It's not that one's better than the other. It's what you like the best. The crank set has 2 rings called chain rings. Big chain ring in the front, and there's a smaller one right back there. Some of you have a triple. Most of you, I think, just have a double. And you'll hear a lot of people say, go to the big ring in the front, go to the small ring in the front. That's what they're talking about in the front. In the back, you have a cassette, which has a variety of gears. You're also seeing this is the rear derailleur right there. And this is the front derailleur right there. But anyway, in the back, you will have a number of gears depending on what kind of bike you have. If you've got a 9-speed, 10-speed, or 11-speed, that dictates how many of these little cogs you have in your cassette. Okay, here's the spokes, here's the tire, the wheel, the rim. This is called the rim right here. And I've got kind of an older bike. Both of my bikes are a little bit older, so I have what's called rim brakes. Some of you with newer bikes will have disc brakes. I have disc brakes on my mountain bike and gravel bike, but not on my road bike or my TT bike yet. This is called the seat post. This is called a seat, but you'll also hear a lot of times people call it the saddle. So, you know, if you're riding and you're doing a spin type workout with Coach Jeanette and she says get up out of the saddle, she means stand up and get your rear end off of the saddle. Okay, let's talk a little bit about how to brake. The way I remember which shifter and brake controls which part of the bike is that everything on the right controls the rear. Right, rear, right, rear, right, brake, rear, right, rear, right, shifter, rear part of the gears down there. I don't even think of this as left. I just think of this as the other one. That controls what goes on in the front. So the front chain ring and the front brake is controlled by the other one. Right, rear, right, rear. Okay, let's talk a little bit about stopping. So you've got 2 brakes. It's a little bit different. You stop a little bit differently with rim brakes than you do with disc brakes, because disc brakes have a little bit better stopping power than rim brakes do. If you clamp down on both brakes at the same time really hard and put a lot of pressure on that other one that controls the front, you will find yourself doing a head spin over the front of your bike. I think of the rear is how you slow yourself down. The front is how you actually come to a stop. So you want to kind of use both of them back and forth, and on rim brakes like I have, you need to do the pressure on and off, on and off. If you just squeeze your brakes really hard, that builds up a lot of heat on the rim of your bike, and it can damage the brakes, as well as sometimes you can even get a flat if you do it too hard and too long. Disc brakes, you don't have to be quite as gentle. They stop better, and they don't build up the heat that you do on a rim brake. So you kind of want to gently squeeze at the same time, put a little bit of pressure on the front till you come to a complete stop. Hopefully you learn to anticipate so you don't have to stop on a dime, because that can be a little bit scary. You also will use the Rear, if you're descending a little bit too quickly and you need to slow yourself down, but again, it's more of this kind of motion, not a squeeze. Off and on, off and on. Okay, let's talk a little bit about shifting. So, you will see, first thing I guess I could talk about, I'm not going to get into gear ratios and things like that, but on the crank set, you'll hear people talk about a compact. That's what I have right here. And all they're talking about when they talk about your chain rings is how many teeth there are right here. And you don't need to know that number, but I'm just going to show you. This is a compact chain ring, so it's a little bit smaller, it's easier to pedal, and it saves your knees a little bit more. On this bike, I'm not sure you can tell, I have a standard on this bike, so the chain ring here is a little bit bigger than the one over here. And that's just because when I ride my time trial bike, I'm usually trying to go as fast as I can, and I'm not on it quite as long, although you will see time trial bikes almost exclusively all the way up to Ironman. So, but it just gives me a little bit more power. And we talked about the cassette having a different range. Now, the best way to remember easy gears, hard gears is the closer you get your chain to the bike frame, the easier it becomes. So as you move your chain from here to here, the pedaling becomes easier. So this tiny little cog right here is harder than this big one right here. Okay? The big one in the front is harder than the little one back here. So instead of trying to rationalize that, just think that as you move your chain towards your bike, pedaling is going to get easier. It doesn't matter if it's front or back. Hard, easy, hard, easy. Now, how do you know where you're doing it when you're up here? Well, this is right rear, and I always think when I push it this direction, I'm climbing up the hill here. So I'm pushing my chain towards my bike when I do like this. When you click this one, it gets harder. So easier, harder. Now, how do you know when to shift? Okay. I think when you did your spinning class with Coach Jeanette, she talked a lot about cadence. Cadence is revolutions per minute, so how many times you can move your pedal around per minute. When you're out riding, not in the class, but when you're out riding, you should count your cadence. Just count it one leg for 15 seconds, multiply it by 4, then you'll get how many times you go around per minute. The gold standard is 90 revolutions per minute. I can tell you that not many triathletes can hold 90 for their entire race. Usually you'll see them around 80-ish, 85. Pro cyclists are like 90 to 110 when they're really going as fast as they can. You want to have a higher cadence versus a lower cadence because it's easier on your legs and your joints. You might get a little bit more of a cardio workout going faster, but eventually you will adjust. So, and you'll get the feel of it. So when you're doing a class with Jeanette, if you don't have a cadence or speed sensor and you just have you and your bike without your little computer on the front, which is, again, you don't have to have one of those. If you might want to, but you don't, it's not a requirement. You'll get the feel of what certain cadences feel like. So when she says, or when anyone says, lower your cadence and she wants you to go into a harder gear, that means you shift into a harder gear so that your cadence slows a little bit. You want to try to keep as high of a cadence as you can maintain even when you're climbing up a hill. So when you want to shift, eventually you'll be able to anticipate and you'll say, oh, there's a hill. I'm going to need to shift down in another 100 feet or something like that. But if you don't, until you get experienced, once you start feeling that cadence that you've been riding with starting to slow, then you need to put yourself in an easier gear. You want to keep your cadence as steady as you can throughout your ride. So you don't want to go from 90 to 60 all of a sudden. You want to downshift so that you can keep those legs spinning, keep those muscles working, but not in a really high gear. They call that mashing when you're just really pushing a really, really hard gear. And eventually it does take its tolls on your knees, and it also won't leave your legs fresh enough to ride. So that's it. I'm almost to 15 minutes. I gotta say bye.
Bye.
Happy riding.